what do these numbers have in common? There's a story to tell with these numbers. Do you know where I'm headed? I have a story to tell you with these numbers and a message of hope. I have a challenge for us because of some of these numbers that I want to explain to you. But then there is hope, and I want to explain why there's hope, and I want to set the bar higher. And we're doing something a little different today. I want to present to you a challenge. If you're not already on fire for making reading education in this country and in all English-speaking countries better, then I hope this will light a little fire under you. But I also don't want to overwhelm you. I want to give you a vision for how it can be done and not be overwhelming. So let's go back to those numbers. First of all, in the US, about 65% of fourth graders are not proficient. This is a really large number, right? We can do better than this. And I think we've gotten accustomed to this. This is the number, more or less, that's gone on for ever since the NAEP has been in development. And it's even worse, the number for our students of color. Many of them, it's even far, far worse, up into the 80s, being not proficient in reading education. And that's not acceptable. But I don't want you to panic because there's some other numbers. I have some other good stories to tell you. Before I get there, there's a challenge. Here's a challenge too. Not only are our kids not doing really well, but part of it seems to be stemming back to the way we're preparing our teachers. We have learned a lot about how to maybe do writing process, about how to do interactive read aloud, shared reading, how to build community, interactive read aloud, a lot of wonderful things that we have learned if we've gone through the mainstream traditional reading education program here in the US. But there is at least one really important component that we're not getting across well, and that's represented by this number. The National Council for Teacher Quality is assessing teacher preparation programs in the US and just looking at some very, very fundamental things. Are they including the big 5 that were most important from, or got the most attention from the National Reading Panel? Are these are the teacher prep programs including phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary knowledge, and comprehension? Are they including them? 51% are including those foundational principles, at least in some level. That means that many of them, 49%, are excluding some of those core components which we know lead to reading achievement. That would be like a doctor missing an entire section of his preparation by not learning about viruses and how to treat them. It's just kind of unacceptable. So these numbers, I think there's a correlation. What's going on in teacher prep programs is not everything by any stretch of the imagination, but we hear regularly from teachers like you that you haven't felt really well prepared to teach reading, and you haven't felt like you knew how to teach anyone how to read the words. And that was kind of my experience too. I had a master's. I felt like I had good tools for learning for how to teach higher level skills, how to teach comprehension strategies, how to develop motivation, how to develop knowledge of different genres. But when it came to the topic of learning how to recognize words, I wasn't well prepared. And that's what's led me on this path to develop Reading Simplified. Over the last 20 years, I've been working kind of passionately on this, and that's part of my message of hope. So 65% not proficient, 51%, only 51% of our teacher prep programs that have been analyzed containing, at the bare minimum, the major topics of phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary knowledge, comprehension, fluency. Those are some of the bad numbers. And then there's some other numbers I want to talk about. These two. Between 2 and 5 and 25, how do they relate? Well, David Kilpatrick, who wrote this ground-shifting book, Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties in 2015, starts the book out with some really powerful words. And he goes on to build a case for this thesis that he establishes in the first few pages. And I want to read it to you because it relates to those numbers, and it's moving us towards that hope and that challenge that I have for us. So Kilpatrick writes, there have been literally thousands of research studies in the last 4 decades on all aspects of reading, but only small bits and pieces seem to make their way out of the scientific journals and into our K-12 classrooms. Has that been your experience? To some extent, that has been mine. And Kilpatrick goes on, he says, to illustrate this, studies of the most common intervention practices used for struggling readers show that those interventions result in an average improvement of 2 to 5 standard score points. Okay, so the things that are really common going on in our classroom, what types of gains are they expected to make based on research? A standard score points change of 2 to 5. All right. By contrast, some of the research coming from federal intervention grants initiatives indicate average improvements of 12 to 25 standard score points that are maintained for 2 to 3 and 4 years follow-ups. The fact that we are not seeing average gains like these in our schools demonstrates why I refer to this research as our largely untapped. So we are actually blessed with a tremendous amount of reading research now, but it's just not getting its way into the classrooms, not all of it. And there's a lot of it, but some of it is really important to make the difference on these numbers. And why aren't we doing the interventions that get 25 standard score point differences as opposed to these rinky-dink differences? That was one of the main points that Kilpatrick is making. Another thing that I wanted to point out with regards to this 51%, a lot of these schools are not teaching phonemic awareness, despite the fact that phonemic awareness is the number one most likely to predict reading achievement. In other words, it's the best single predictor of reading achievement. The perception of individual sounds is the best predictor. This is kind of mind-blowing because in the social science research, you always find initially IQ or socioeconomic status as the main predictor of outcomes, because the opportunities we have and maybe the gifting that we were born with, those things kind of precede all the other things. But in the case of reading, IQ is not number one, nor is SES. There is this brain skill called phonemic awareness, the perception of hearing the sounds and words, and that ties into beginning reading and how sounds and symbols line up. That is the missing piece for our kids, and you'll see that done in an excellent way in those intervention studies that get the 25 standard score point gains, because the reading research is not just coming out in the last 4 to 5 decades telling us that phonics is important. Yes, we know we need to teach the information explicitly, but really the thing that's most surprising that probably the public doesn't know is that this phonemic awareness is really what drives and opens up the door for students to be able to read. And yet a lot of our teacher prep programs aren't teaching phonemic awareness, even though it's the most strongly correlated with early reading achievement skill. It's kind of mind-blowing. And the fact that this is the number one predictor has been studied and studied and studied. So many different types of studies: psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, brain scans, educational studies. There are case studies, qualitative studies. I did a qualitative study like that, quantitative studies from all over the world in multiple countries. It's particularly important for English speakers because our language is so the spelling system is a little trickier than most alphabetic spelling systems, so we have to have more finely tuned processing of the individual sounds so that we can map them more carefully to all these possible spelling choices that we have, or match them up. So if we're going to change this number, and we should, I want you to be confident that we can, because we see interventions that are getting 25 standard score points, but that's not the status quo. This is the status quo. And the status quo in many places is ignoring phonemic awareness. Or if it's including phonemic awareness, usually it is just at a lower level of segmenting or blending. Another important point that comes from David Kilpatrick's work here in Essentials is that phonemic awareness at the segmenting or blending level is lower than the manipulation level, and that's the manipulation level that all good readers get, and that all the studies that have strong outcomes, they all have that type of training. So when we create word work activities that connect sounds and symbols and get kids moving sounds and symbols in and out of words in a manipulating way, where they're really playing with the sounds and words, that's when we're going to see the gains like this. And we know it can happen because there have been several large federally funded research studies, experiments with a control group and a group that got the treatment that included the #1 predictor for phonemic awareness training. And we have seen these programs get the failure rate, so to speak, down to 5%. So this is what we're living in. This is the status quo. 65% of our kids are not reading proficiently in the US. And in many other English-speaking countries, it is similar, although not quite this bad. But the research suggests that 5% is maybe at the most, maybe, if we applied what we know about how to teach kids to read. And I'm not saying all of it is about this advanced phonemic awareness, and phonemic awareness being a highly important predictor of early reading achievement, but it is one of the most important findings that is often ignored. So when you think about these numbers, 65% not proficient, 51% of our teacher prep programs, including all the 5 components of the National Reading Panel, how phonemic awareness is the #1 predictor of early reading achievement, and yet 2 to 5 standard points is all we can expect from what's common in classrooms today, despite research studies showing us that 25 standard score points is possible, and we can get the failure rate, so to speak, down to 5% and not 65%. Keeping that all together in your mind, I don't want you to be discouraged. I want you to be encouraged and challenged, because we can do better. We don't need to live in this world. This is not because of poverty entirely. It is not because of structural things in society and structural things in our schools. Those things do matter, but if we simply implemented what we already know from research and did the activities that were getting strong outcomes, we would see this number change rapidly. And we should be aiming not for 65% to struggle, but 5%. And so if you are one of those teachers that have felt like you were not prepared to teach reading, and I've been there, I don't want you to just get discouraged. I don't want you to get overwhelmed. I want you to keep believing that we can do better. And I want you to expect more, because we can do better. We have proven that we can do better. We know there's lots of science to show what we're missing out in, and we should start pushing towards that. At least for beginning reading, these are the most these pieces are most important. And when we expect more, if you don't have answers yourself yet, I would encourage you to keep searching. Here at Reading Simplified, we are trying to present a streamlined, simple system for how to teach anyone how to read. As a reading tutor, I typically get struggling readers to grade level after 12 hours of reading instruction. Students who might be in the more challenging level, they will take longer for sure, but they are not taking years with the approaches that really integrate phonemic awareness at a high level in all activities. The roots of the program that we recommend here at Reading Simplified are connected to programs that have gotten those 25 standard score point gains. And so consider the activities here at readingsimplified.com to learn how a handful of activities can accelerate your students' reading. Or if you're not interested in that, I still encourage you to keep searching. Look for answers. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. We can do better than this. We should expect more, but yes, our teachers, myself, maybe you have been let down. Of course, this isn't true for every teacher prep program, but it is true for a lot. And then the materials that we're presented with when we get into the classroom, they are the materials that, okay, maybe they've even been somewhat researched, but they're getting small gains. And then couple that with all the challenges that our children face today and our schools face: structural challenges, poverty, racism, homelessness, mental health, all the challenges that we face. If we're going to choose an intervention that is probably going to barely move the needle, we shouldn't expect to see this change, but we know we can do better. We should look for interventions that are getting the types of gains like 25 standard score points, not this rinky-dink 2.5 standard score point stuff. So please don't give up, expect more, and keep searching. Would you like future complimentary trainings like this here at Reading Simplified? Then make sure you ring the bell here at YouTube to become a subscriber so that you learn more of our ways of streamlining instruction and accelerating students' reading achievement. And you can also find us on Facebook at Reading Simplified, usually on Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go live with other complimentary trainings, and we give away some freebies for teachers and parents. So I hope to see you here again next time on YouTube or even on Facebook. Take care.